1787, 11 ships containing 730 convicts, including 160 women. Way to go, girls! Departed from England. Now, had it been a few years earlier, they probably would have been headed for the American colonies, which at that time was the dumping ground for Britain's undesirables. But since we got our independence, they had to dump them someplace else. So they took a long journey going all the way into 1788, into January, to Botany Bay in Australia. Australia was a relatively new colony in the British Empire, and perhaps at that time, if they had known the number of creepy, disturbing, downright dangerous animals of every variety, of every class of animal, then maybe the British would have concluded that sending anyone to Australia was cruel and unusual punishment. But it was the start of a nation. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Jim's Friday Freakout. Today we're looking at Australia versus people. Da-da-da, dun-dun-dun-dun, da-da-da, da-da. If you think this is fun, like and subscribe below. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a television series put out by the BBC a few years ago called Deadly 60, which looked at the most deadly animals from all around the world. And in the words of that show, Australia is the home of deadly. That's certainly backed up by an article I read recently in National Geographic, Australian Geographic, that talked about the 30 most deadly creatures in Australia. Now, that's not saying there are 30 deadly ones. They're just looking at the 30 most deadly. They looked in a little more detail in a book they put out called Australia's Most Dangerous. Now, I don't own this book, so I don't have an exact count, but it's a 219-page book. I noticed by flipping through it on Amazon that every deadly creature has its own 2-page spread. So then you take out introduction and conclusion. I still think we're talking about maybe 90 deadly animals. And to really help us out, the book includes first aid, which may or may not be useful depending on the species you're talking about. So let's break it down. Going from the bottom of the evolutionary chain to the top, insane invertebrates. Like that picture there? Well, it came with the template. But it points out that butterflies are free, but some of the other invertebrates in Australia could cost you your life. This is an extremely varied category, as you'll see in just a moment. The funnel web spider. These things are responsible for several deaths a year in Australia. The weird thing about them is that their toxin, which has a variety of effects on the nervous system and ultimately breathing, blood pressure, is only mildly toxic to dogs, cats, mice, guinea pigs, but is frequently deadly to primates, including, of course, human beings. What the H? Why did they evolve that way? There was an article in The Economist, which is a British magazine that I respect a lot, that usually looks at things like the worldwide economy or the political situation. They had an article about what is the evolutionary story on funnel web spiders. If anybody reads it, let me know. All I know is I don't want to meet one. The box jellyfish, the most venomous creature in the ocean. Another source I read said it's the most venomous creature on the planet. Those long tentacles can get up to 10 feet long. They have nematocysts on them, little needle-like applicators of deadly nerve poison. There are people who have been stung by box jellyfish who, among the many health-threatening symptoms that it can cause, have simply died from the pain. It was so painful, they went into shock and therefore cardiac arrest. Isn't that mind-boggling? So glad I don't live where there are any box jellyfish, unless they're an invasive species around here now. The blue-ringed octopus. Well, why wouldn't that be the star of anyone's saltwater aquarium until it kills you? It's not a big octopus, but there is no known antivenom for its sting. The only hope if you get bitten bad by a blue-ringed octopus is that they put you on a ventilator until your body eventually works its way through the poison. How's that for a charming thought? Good Lord in heaven. I said they're not very big. That gives you an idea. Makes it sort of a little harder to avoid them, doesn't it? And I don't know who in heaven's name this is with this thing sitting on their hand. All right, fierce fish. Well, it's Australia, so I know what you're all thinking. But let me start with a little story. Many years ago, I was getting a haircut from a guy who was from Australia. And if you see this, you'll believe me when I say that the haircut was a very long time ago. But he told me that he was once out surfing with some friends back home in Australia, pretty far down the coast from an ocean. Now, around from a city. Around the cities, the Australians had traditionally done netting to protect people from sharks. But this was way down the coast where there were no nets. And he was the least experienced surfer among them. Suddenly he noticed that all of the other surfers had pulled in their arms and legs and they were looking around like this. And the reason was that somebody had smelled ammonia. And there was a belief that great white sharks smell like ammonia. Well, I looked into it a little bit, and I don't know if there's ever a case where you can smell it on the surface of the ocean before one attacks you, but it definitely is true of sharks that they have more urea in their bodies than most species. Most species get rid of their waste of that sort through their urine, but sharks circulate it into their skin to use it to help protect them against the drying effects of salt water. Strange. I guess maybe some whales do it too. So if you find a rotting shark, it's probably going to smell like ammonia. But I would look around a little bit if you ever smell ammonia when you're just swimming around in the ocean. Of course, here's the nightmare, the star of every Shark Week that's ever been on the Discovery Channel, the great white. There's really nothing I can say that can add to the terror that's been generated in the minds of most people ever since the movie Jaws, which kept me up for 2 weeks after I saw it when I was 13. But I will add this, that they evolved to prey on marine mammals, seals and such. So if you're ever in the ocean, you're basically the slowest, most incompetent marine mammal that great white has ever seen, which may make you a tempting morsel. If you're surfing in an area anywhere near a seal colony, there's a pretty strong chance that a great white has checked you out and made some decisions about you. Let's hope they made one that doesn't kill you. Here are the other two most deadly types of sharks, tiger sharks and bull sharks. And whites, tigers, and bulls among them are responsible for more fatalities among humans than any other types of sharks. And Australia's got all three in abundance. Amphibians. Now, they generally seem pretty innocuous. This is the cane toad, and this one is an introduced species. It's an invasive species. In 1935, some guy got the idea that they could control the insects that were feeding on their cane plants by introducing these toads. Unfortunately, the toads had very little interest in the insects that they were intended to control. They spread like wildfire, and when other Australian species tried to feed on them, they fell victim to the venom that is secreted by the cane toad from glands behind their ears. So they did no good and some harm. I'm not aware of any people being killed by them, but they're poisonous. Good God, Australia. Rampaging reptiles. Oh, what a rich category this is in Australia. 8 out of the 10 most venomous species of snakes on the planet live in Australia. And the number one, which we'll talk about in a minute, the inland taipan, is an Australian species. 3 of them are sea snakes, but a country's coastal waters are part of the territory of that country, and all 3 of those sea snakes live in the coastal waters off Australia and other places as well. Boy, I put this in perspective. There are only 2 types of venomous snakes that live near me in New Jersey: copperhead and an eastern timber rattler, which is endangered. So I don't expect to ever see one in the course of my life. I'm still going to keep an eye out when I pick up logs. In the United States, there are 4 kinds of venomous snakes. There are copperheads, rattlesnakes, water moccasins, and coral snakes as general categories. And in the course of a year, several thousand people are bitten by them in the US, and about 5 people die. Australia, I saw a couple of different statistics. Either 2 people die per year of snakebite in Australia, but that was from the Royal Flying Doctor Service, which I'm wondering, was somebody pranking me, or is that actually a thing? Another source said 4 to 6 deaths a year. But what you want to keep in mind is that Australia has a total population, that gigantic country, of 25 million people. We have 330. So the fact that they have anywhere even comparable the number of snake bites tells you that there's a lot more snake biting going on per capita in Australia than there is here. There was a particularly disturbing story of a nurse. This was in Newsweek last year. Lived in Brisbane, which is one of the cities of Australia. Okay, she wasn't out in the outback or the bush, as they say. She was in a populated area, and she was bitten by a venomous snake while she was sleeping in her own bed. It was only because someone else in the house started to recognize the symptoms, because she didn't immediately know that she was bit, and they took her in, she got treatment, and she survived. The problem is, They never located the snake that bit her, and now she's afraid to live in her own house. I would be. Okay, here are a couple of the top offenders. I'm particularly disturbed by the first one, the eastern brown snake. This is responsible for more deaths in Australia than any other. They live in populated areas. Their other name is the common brown snake. Isn't that a nice thought? That one of the most toxic, deadly species is common. Also, the fact that they don't even have the decency to be brightly colored so you know to stay away from them. They're brown. They blend in. They're also aggressive and bad-tempered. How's that for a combination? The tiger snake, at least it has the decency to have some stripes on it, but it also tends to be found, and it is found in populated areas because it's a snake that's near the water, and most of Australia's population is along the seacoast. The coastal taipan, not exactly the same range as the tiger snake, but I think it overlaps some. It's more in the along the southern coast of Australia. Until recently, there was no antivenom for this one. So it was a crapshoot if you got bit. And there's our number one most toxic venom of any snake on the planet, the inland taipan. Now, these aren't responsible for many deaths because they tend to live in rocky, isolated areas. Thanks, inland taipan. And while we're talking about reptiles, the Australians affectionately call these salties. Isn't that a charming name for something that can get, I really can't get my head around this, a 23-foot long predator. That's longer than a great white. That's longer than the biggest great white that's ever been known to science. They don't get as heavy, but over a ton, that's still a pretty scary thing. I've seen pictures of these things getting fed from tourist boats, and when they rear up out of the water to get the food from the people, it's like the size of a small car. Lord in heaven. They live along the northern coast of Australia and in other parts of the Indian Ocean too. A story about a saltwater crocodile struck a little close to home here several years ago when a woman from the town I grew up in was killed by a saltwater crocodile on the trip of a lifetime with her boyfriend. They were in the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean. Unfortunately, another one of the Andaman Islands contains a crocodile sanctuary. This is a woman who grew up in the town I grew up in, went to a church I've driven by many times. They had to fight the crocodile to get her body back. Good Lord, Australia. Brutal birds. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When I came up trying to work class by class through all the kinds of animals, you know, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, I thought there'd be nothing in the birds category. But I underestimated Australia. This is the cassowary. Think like an ostrich or an emu. It's a large flightless bird. Not nearly as big as an ostrich. The females get up to about 160 pounds, the males up to 120 pounds. They can run 31 miles per hour. They have the coloration clearly of like a child coloring in a dinosaur coloring book. And on each leg, they have one claw that is really long and razor sharp. So they can eviscerate an animal with a kick. There was a guy in Florida who owned one of these things, and he was killed by it. It was a bit of a strange story that they described it as accidental because he fell. I'm sorry, if you fall down in front of a bird and it kills you, the whole thing's an accident. I don't really understand that at all. The Florida Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, there it is, says that cassowaries are a class 2 species. And that's a designation of the danger of an exotic species. These are in the same categories as alligators and snow leopards. You want to get to class 1, you have to be a lion or a tiger. This is one step below a lion or a tiger. Good Lord, Australia. So now mammals. Yes, we knew there'd be some variety here. The dingo. Now this name became amusing in American culture because there was a movie called A Cry in the Dark from the 80s, starring Meryl Streep and Sam Neill, where one was like, the dingo ate my baby. They were on, it's a true story of some people who were on vacation, the baby disappeared. And then this later got made fun of on Seinfeld, where she said to some annoying woman, maybe the dingo ate your baby. And that like became a joke ever since then. It's not quite so funny because the woman who made this claim, who was portrayed by Meryl Streep in the movie, they concluded that she had actually killed the baby. They put her in jail. After several years, additional evidence came to light, and they concluded no, a dingo probably did kill her baby. They let her out. She got a big settlement because she was wrongly accused. So keep an eye out for dingoes if you ever go to Australia. And there's one island, Fraser Island, off Australia, where there's a population of dingoes known to be especially aggressive toward humans. I don't think I'm going to go on vacation there. Yeah, the platypus. Now, these things aren't running after you trying to kill you, but they're already the weirdest, most bizarre animal in the world. And, I mean, you've heard the stories of it's a mammal with a duck's beak that lays eggs. Well, the other weird thing is the males on their back legs have a spur that is venomous. Doesn't kill people, but it will certainly teach you not to pick up a platypus next time. Horses. They just threw in here because I did read one source that said very sensibly that more people die of allergies to things like horses and cats and stuff than die from all these exotic creatures. But still, there's just an emotional difference. I think I'd rather go from the horse allergy. And the Australian fruit bat, merely one example of many bats that live in Australia. And bats worldwide are one of the major vectors of transmission of rabies to human beings. You've probably heard this. There are two varieties of closely related diseases that can be carried by bats there, rabies and Australian bat lysovirus. Here's the freak show thing. The symptoms include a lot of things, and one of them is aversion to clean water and air. That's a disease symptom? And then I remembered there's an old name for rabies, hydrophobia, which would mean fear of water. I always thought that's the stupidest name for a disease I ever heard. But that's an actual symptom. What the heck? Not to mention that Australia doesn't just have like those little bats. It's got these things that are like the size of a fox that when it's hanging upside down from a tree with its wings folded around, literally looks like Dracula hanging there waiting to get you, and they can have rabies. Thanks, Australia. All right. Interesting statistic from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 416. That's how many people were killed last year by other people in Australia. Now, compared to the United States, they're doing pretty well because on a per capita basis, their murder rate is 1/3 ours. But whether you're talking about the US or Australia, the fact remains that despite all their terrifying, venomous, dangerous, deadly species, man is still the most dangerous game of all. So many sources to thank for this episode. Good Lord. First of all, this presentation, this PowerPoint presentation was a template I found on Slides Carnival. Thank you. And at least one of the pictures came with it. It was from unsplash.com, mentalfloss.com, Australian Geographic, National Geographic, NOAA.gov. That's where I get my weather news every day. And it's also where I learned more about what jellyfish do to you. Time.com, the CDC. They gave me a little perspective on what happens to people bitten by snakes in the United States, just for perspective. Economist.com and Healthline.com and other sources I've probably forgotten. If you've enjoyed this, here are our two mascots for the episode. We hope you'll like and subscribe. You can do that right down below. And what we'd love even more, consider sponsoring us on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can help support the work that keeps this content coming fresh, content that is funny, that is informative, that is inspiring, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. So consider it. Thanks so much for joining us, folks, and we look forward to seeing you next time.